Two and a Half Admins, episode 20. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, you've got a couple of things to plug, Alan.
Yes. On the 20th, the 20th, hosting another webinar about ZFS, and this time specifically about OpenZFS 2.0. If you heard Jim and I going on about it, was it 2 weeks ago, I think, on the show, then you might be interested. We're going to cover more than just what's in ZFS 2.0, but what those advantages are and what the implications are if you're building, if you're planning your next pool, but also how to take advantage of it on OSs that don't ship the new version, but how to get 2.0 on your OS and start using it today. After that, we also have a second thing over on my company's website. We have another one of our articles up. This one is about routing and firewalling VLANs using FreeBSD. So this uses FreeBSD's VNet feature, which allows you to have multiple different network stacks running at the same time, and using that to basically have a different firewall for a different VLAN, but multiple firewalls in the same machine, basically.
Sounds like sorcery to me.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll have links for both those in the show notes. So let's do some news then. And the first one, we don't generally swear too much on this show, but I'm going to now. Fuck GoDaddy, quite frankly. Just before Christmas, they sent their employees an email saying they were getting a holiday bonus. And then the people who clicked through the link a couple days later got an email saying, oh, that was a phishing test, and now you have to do the training again. And by the way, yeah, there is no holiday bonus for anyone.
Nice newsletter with fancy graphics saying 2020 has been a record year, blah, blah, blah. Here, have a $650 one-time holiday bonus. And then, yeah, after you click through, it's psych, this was a phishing scam.
I don't know. Seems legit enough to me. I mean, there's nothing stopping an attacker from sending the exact same thing out. And in theory, they should not fall for that by immediately providing, whatever information the phish was looking for. I wish that article had said more about, what information the phish required them to put in. It was a little thin on the details.
Yeah, my understanding is that it was just clicking the link was enough to trigger them to get the email saying you've got to take the training.
To ensure that you receive your one-time bonus in time for the holidays, please select your location and fill in the details by Friday, December 18th.
Right.
It doesn't actually say what triggered the email, you failed our recent phishing test, but presumably it requires actually filling out that information. It never does say what that information was.
Yeah, I do see it from the other side, right? That yes, they do have to conduct these tests and they do have to keep their security tight, but don't do it just before Christmas with that kind of thing.
Your attackers aren't going to have any such scruples.
Yeah, that's something we definitely talked about before, was the concept of trendjacking and specifically taking advantage of things that were happening, whether it's just a seasonal thing in the holidays or if it's sending Trump supporter emails. Usually the way that you can help overcome that activation energy to get people to click through is to have it be topical. But I do wish there was more detail, specifically like what were supposed to be the telltales that it was a fake email as well.
The big thing to me is just the details that it was looking for. Like if all it wanted was the name and address, but I mean, if people clicked on the thing that said, congratulations, you're getting a bonus, what's your email password? Then yeah, fuck them. Retake the security test.
Yeah.
I do know that the email is not customized with the recipient's name and so on. So that's a little bit of a giveaway, although not a big one.
Oh, no, here's the huge tell right here. Any submittals after the cutoff will not be accepted, and you will not receive the one-time bonus of $650. And then, in parenthesis, free money, claim it now. Yeah, that's totally what your HR department sends to you when you have a Christmas bonus.
Yeah.
All right, so we're losing sympathy for the people who fell for this then.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, come on, man. Pay attention. I don't know how much sympathy I'm supposed to have for people who will just click on whatever crap shows up in their inbox and do whatever random thing without thinking about it. Like, if you're doing that, you're a problem. Stop.
It was really interesting to learn more about the psychology and stuff that goes behind these. In particular, like you always wonder, like a lot of the phishing scams you see are like really badly written in like broken English. And you're like, why don't they do a better job? And it's like, well, normally they are trying to get the people that are so dumb they're going to fall for it. So everything they do to turn off people that are not dumb means they don't waste their time on the, the less good marks. And then you have the opposite where you have something like spear phishing, where, you're specifically targeting people in like the military industrial complex, and you make up a fake conference or make up emails for a real conference and, get them to open the PDF that has the Adobe 0-day in it or whatever to compromise their computer.
It's like the difference between when I get the scam email that says, that claims to be an invoice for an iPhone that I bought on Amazon versus when I get the scam email that claims to be an invoice for, buying a rack of Dell servers on Amazon.
I got woken up by a phone call recently that said you've recently done an Amazon Prime trial and you need to log into it to make sure you're not going to get charged again, which is true. Recently, I did do an Amazon Prime trial, and this woke me up, and I was, what's going on? And then the guy started getting really irritated with me because I cottoned on, and like he was saying, right, so, are you on a computer or an iPad? I said, an iPad. He says, well, go to the Play Store then. And I said, okay, I've gone to the Play Store. He's like, there is no Play Store on iOS. Why are you doing this? It was a very strange attitude. Like, I don't know what he thought he was going to accomplish, but yeah, I didn't fall for it. I fell for it for about 10 seconds while I was waking up, but then
I don't know, the main two I've been getting are, this is the Visa MasterCard security department, and congratulations, you've been paying your bill and you qualify for 0% interest on all of your cards. Just press 1. Like, yeah, no. And then, this is the enforcement division of the Justice Department, and we're going to come arrest you if you don't pay us with iTunes gift cards.
Some of it is very sinister. Like, we found, bad things on your computer or whatever, and if you don't pay us this much Bitcoin or whatever.
I've definitely seen lots of the email ones where it's like, yeah, we turned on your webcam and we have pictures of you.
We saw you having fun with the video that we put on our site, and, we're going to... Yeah. We're going to do like a picture-in-picture of you abusing yourself while you watch the video and what the video is, and we know what you like. And I was getting a whole string of those for a while, and like I kept posting on Facebook and, like telling my friends, like, if one of you lot didn't come up with $1,000, you're all going to have to watch it. But the funniest thing was most of those things, like, they try to get in your head with this, like really convincing you that they know what's going on. And this one string of them kept saying that, like, what if everybody saw that picture next to you in that really nice car you drive? And I'm like, what? Why are you bringing the Mazda into this? What's that got to do with it?
So I suppose companies like GoDaddy have to do shit like this then, is the bottom line.
Well, if 500 of their employees fell for it, that's a lot. I don't know what their total headcount is and so on.
7,000. Yeah, it's about 8%? That's actually doing really well. I mean, I usually see when I run phishing tests against clients that represent it, I usually end up with, somewhere between like 30 and 50% failure rates, honestly. Sorry, GoDaddy folks, but if you were one of the 8% that fell for claim your free money now Christmas bonus, well, yes, you're going to have to retake your email security test.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Linode. Go to linode.com/2.5 to get started with $100 free credit. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing enterprise infrastructure, Linode offers simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions that allow you to take your project to the next level. Simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and more easily. Linode has 11 global data centers and provides 24/7 365 human support with no tiers or handoffs regardless of your plan size. In addition to shared and dedicated compute instances, you can use your $100 credit on S3-compatible object storage, manage Kubernetes, and more. Our website is hosted with Linode, and we couldn't be happier with them. So go to linode.com/2.5 and click the Create Free Account button to get started. That's linode.com/2.5. All right, let's talk about Brexit then, and specifically the Brexit deal. So the Brexit deal was finalized on Christmas Eve, right in the nick of time. But then it was published a day or so later and people started pouring through it. And they found some pretty strange technical details in there, like the suggestion that people use SHA-1.
Netscape Communicator, the email client, to be able to do SMIME, even though that was end of life in 1997. So my question is, if they cut and pasted the text from a law from 2008, why it was wrong then?
Well, it turns out that the one that they copy and pasted it from had copy and pasted it from an earlier one. And it was all about this DNA database, well, a database of DNA and other stuff that is shared around Europe.
Yes. Annex Law number 1, exchange of DNA, fingerprints, and vehicle registration data. And I guess the point is that it should only be communicated using S-MIME encrypted email.
Yeah, there's so much wrong with that. I mean, if security is important enough that you need to enshrine into law the correct technology to use, then it's apparently important enough that you should be hiring people to be involved in the drafting of those laws that actually understand the technology and are reviewing it, right?
Well, in particular, I think you probably don't want to enshrine algorithms into the law because they will need to change on a regular basis, and laws take a while to get changed. That's why the whole point of things like the AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard, is that this is a standard that will be reviewed constantly and be updated over time. And we just say you have to follow the current best practices or whatever. And that says, you can use this algorithm and then we will eventually deprecate it and you'll have this long to move to the new one. And I don't know that it makes sense to have to update the law every 4 years to say, hey, you should be using at least 4096-bit TLS keys now, not 2048 or whatever.
Well, I mean, you can kind of work around that by saying that, the law is that you have to adhere to the best practices published at and by.
Yeah.
And that's a separate document that's not actually the law. But then again, you have to actually update it. I don't think any of us is really going to, with a straight face, say that the only problem here was that the law couldn't be updated fast enough to get the references to Netscape Communicator and SHA-1 out of it.
Right.
Now, that wasn't the issue. Document rot was the issue. Nobody paid any attention to it and just kept cargo cult copy and pasting and didn't care. And if that's the level of attention to detail you're going to put into the law, then you shouldn't have had it in the first place.
These laws, especially as they get longer and longer, we see more and more of this just, we took the same old thing and we changed a couple of words around or whatever, and we just kept grabbing these sections. And we wonder why the laws end up being, these giant tomes that are thousands of pages. Like this Netscape stuff is buried on page 921. It's like, I understand this deal was put together very quickly at the last minute or whatever, but they've also been working on it for how many years? They didn't have a draft that didn't have everything cargo culted from a law that had everything cargo culted from the time before.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Datadog, the performance monitoring and analytics solution for real-time visibility into a Linux environment. Combining metrics, traces, and logs in one unified platform allows you to get a bird's-eye view of your entire infrastructure. You can also see any underutilized cloud or on-premises servers via the real-time auto-generated host map. Datadog's machine learning-based alerts eliminate false positives and make sure that you only receive alerts on issues that matter. You can automatically detect unanticipated outliers, anomalies, and errors with Watchdog, the auto-detection engine that surfaces performance problems in your applications without any manual setup or configuration. Start your Datadog trial today by visiting datadog.com/25admins. Start your free trial, create one dashboard, and you'll get a free Datadog t-shirt. That's datadog.com/25admins. Let's do some free consulting then. If you want to send your questions in for Jim and Alan, the best way is via email, show@2.5admins.com. And you can support creation of these episodes at 2.5admins.com/support. You can support us by PayPal or Patreon. And if you do so via Patreon, for $5 or more per month, you can get an advert-free RSS feed. So go and check that out. So Marcelo, I think that's how you say it, writes in, I'd like to hear your opinion regarding Active Directory solutions, comparing FreeIPA, Samba v4, and OpenLDAP. Which do you use, and in which case? This topic is not often discussed online, and most articles are from 2 decades ago, so I'm interested in your comments.
I've done it with Samba v4. I mean, I've done a no-kidding Active Directory domain controller with Samba v4 vanilla. I've done it with Samba 4 on FreeNAS and on XigmaNAS, and they do work, but I don't. The thing is, if you want Active Directory, you almost certainly want Active Directory for a whole bunch of Windows machines to integrate with it. And if you're doing that, then it seems a little precious to not get the Windows Server to go along with it. Even more so now that, if you're doing all this from a highly, Linuxy open source perspective, you're probably running that Windows Server in a VM anyway. And modern Windows Server licensing allows you to run 2 VMs off of the same seat of Windows Server. So you can, for your one, $700 cost for Windows Server, you can have a domain controller and you can have an app and file server, in 2 separate VMs. So I can't imagine the amount of additional work and potential things to go wrong and lack of, great support for figuring that out if it does. I can't imagine saving $700 being worth exposing yourself to the additional hassle and potential issues, that you're going to have doing that personally.
Yeah, I'd agree. For running the domain controller itself, you definitely probably just want a Windows VM. Now, I've used SAM before to join an open source machine to the Windows network so that, the file server can authenticate people from Active Directory to do ACLs and so on. But for hosting the domain controller, like Jim's saying, if you've already got a bunch of the Windows machines, you're already in that ecosystem, it's just going to work better to have the Windows server. And yeah, it can be in a VM running on your Linux or BSD machine. That works great. And I'd probably do that because, yeah, like Jim's saying, saving that license, especially since you kind of get the 2-for-1 deal going there, it's just not going to be worth the amount of time and hassle to get it set up and working, let alone to keep it working, and let alone every time you run into a thing where actually the Samba thing doesn't quite support it 100%. It'd just be easier to have a real Windows server.
And when that breaks, you're going to have to explain that breakage and the fact that breakage is due to the fact that you decided to do this weird thing instead of just installing Windows. I have one client who is using, I think it's Open Media Vault. And they're using Samba rather than Windows for, centralized file storage right now. Everybody else I've just moved over to Windows. Now that one client, that client specifically, they just have a bug up their butt and they don't want to have Windows. They want to have Samba underneath it. So by golly, that's what they get, and I'm not mad about it. But anywhere else where, the client just wants to get the thing done with their collection of, Windows machines, it's just a better idea to stay in that ecosystem. Now, like Alan said, absolutely, we virtualize that Windows server. We put it on top of ZFS, or Alan puts it on top of ZFS. They're very similar. You snapshot it every hour on the hour. You replicate it to a hot spare. You replicate it offsite to DR. If Windows Update goes wheels up over the weekend and the VM won't boot on Monday, you don't even try to fix that freaking thing. You just roll it back to the last good snapshot and done. That's where you get all your, awesome open source, this is better than if I was just doing the thing native. That's where that comes in. But where you don't want to put in your alternate open source stuff is where it's going to touch the users in ways that the users don't like. And that's just way too likely to happen with the AD server, in my opinion.
Yeah, so either you have a bunch of Windows clients and that's why you want an Active Directory server, you might as well have Windows, or you don't have that many Windows, you don't have any Windows machines, then why do you want Active Directory?
Okay, this episode is sponsored by TrueNAS from iXsystems. Go to TrueNAS.com. TrueNAS and FreeNAS have now unified as TrueNAS, the #1 open storage OS. TrueNAS uses the power and reliability of OpenZFS to bring open source economics to enterprise-grade unified storage with support for file, block, object, and app storage. You can use the free TrueNAS Core Edition or invest in a TrueNAS Enterprise system. Coming soon is TrueNAS Scale, which provides open hyperconverged infrastructure with support for Linux containers, and you can follow the development, try out, and contribute to this exciting project. Check out TrueNAS.com and see how TrueNAS can support your next storage project, whether it's just a few terabytes all the way up to multiple petabytes. That's TrueNAS.com. All right, Lilith writes in, I have a question about the server creation or decommission process. Could you guys explain what your processes are regarding these two subjects? Do developers need to fill in some form if they need a new server, for example? Do you guys update some server infrastructure list or diagram? If so, what are your tools of choice?
My server list is a DNS zone file. If it's in my private DNS zone, then it is a live server that I am monitoring and managing and maintaining. And when I decommission it, it gets yanked right out of the zone file, and then I stop caring about it anymore. It's if I forget to take it out of Nagios, I'll remember real quick because, when the private DNS entry does not resolve anymore, Nagios will holler and I'll be like, oh, yeah, I decommed that. And I'll take it out of the Nagios configs as well. That's pretty much it. I don't maintain like a separate spreadsheet because I don't personally need to share it with anybody else. Things get kind of a little bit more complicated if you do, but I'm a big fan of no unnecessary duplication. And since I'm the one that needs to know all those answers, put it in the zone file and done is good for me.
We do the same thing for IP management. The source of truth of what the IP is for is the reverse DNS zone file.
For me, it's not reverse DNS. If you want the equivalent of reverse DNS, you look at the WireGuard config. Anything that's not in the WireGuard config is an unused IP. Anything that's in the WireGuard config, it has a comment that's the same thing as, what the actual DNS for that IP is.
The other things in our commissioning process, we use RackMonkey, which is this ye olde Perl web script, but gives you a nice diagram of the rack and lets you put in the servers and keep track of when you bought it, what its serial numbers are, and so on. So it makes it easy to manage hardware refreshes, know which machines where in the rack and what is connected to and which ports on the switch it ends up getting assigned to and so on. Because again, you don't want to duplicate that information everywhere because then the two different copies will disagree about something and then you'll not know which one is right. So having a single source of truth for things is definitely my preference as well. Decommissioning is about the same. We don't decommission things very often. It's like, we usually run it until it dies. Most of our edge servers don't have anything sensitive on them, so we don't have to worry about trying to deban them or something. It's usually not the case.
I actually do decommission things these days. I used to run things until the wheels fell off, but lately I've been, doing more of a planned obsolescence type deal. And I'll have a hardware end of life. So my decommissioning process is usually, replace the machine with its replacement and then go, oh, hey, this thing's still got a few years of life left on it. I'll totally do something with that. And then it clutters up my office for another few years until it finally gets recycled. Every once in a while, I will end up taking one of those machines. Like I'll have a client who has had, a really bad year financially and, they have an older machine die and they can't really afford or don't want to afford right then, the full cost, replacement with something brand new that they can expect to last, for the same 7 or 8 years that they ran the wheels off the last thing. And I'll be like, well, we can real cheap do this. And, then one of those things that's sitting in my boneyard might get resurrected. But that's fairly rare. Most of my folks are on a pretty reasonable, planned hardware refresh cycle at this point.
Yeah, and for us, we got rid of anything that wasn't at least Westmere or so. But, that covers a very large timeline nowadays.
Yeah, well, how do you decide what that timeline is then?
For us, it's mostly when the amount of electricity it's going to use is going to cost more than it's worth. Or, it's just not going to have enough cores or not going to be able to support enough RAM to be useful. At one point we're anything that doesn't have at least 16 gigs of RAM is retired.
I generally tell my clients, we're looking for a 5-year life cycle on most things. And for servers, it's a little bit different. For a server, then you say we plan financially for a 5-year life cycle. At the end of 5 years, we'll reevaluate and look how things go. And, a lot of the time you may make the choice, hey, we want to stretch this out to 7 or 8 years, and they'll usually do that just fine. But, the big thing there is, okay, that money that you had planned to spend in 5 years, you don't spend that. You keep that socked away, so because now you're more in the likelihood that you may need to buy something on an emergency basis. So you need to make sure that you can do that. Now, most of these folks also, there's a level of redundancy in that they've usually got a production machine and an on-site hot spare. So it's not the end of the world if something does fall over, but you still don't want to be doing that 20-year-old dirt poor thing where you literally drive your car until I used to replace my tires literally when they blew out, back in the late 80s and in the mid 90s, I had, cars that had the full size wheel in the trunk with a real tire on it. And that was my replacement strategy. When a tire blew out, I put the new wheel with a new tire on it on the side of the road. I put a new tire on that wheel and that one went in the trunk. Wait till the next blowout, replace that one. But, as you grow up a little bit more and you get a little bit more financially stable and, you have more an interest of uptime and planned repair cycles, then, for your servers, as with your tires, you're better off saying, okay, look, I get that it hasn't blown out, but we want to replace it before it does.
Yeah, because it must be cheaper to do that ultimately in terms of labor and downtime and all the rest of it.
I mean, it certainly can be, but I think the big thing is not that it's cheaper in terms of labor and downtime and whatever necessarily, so much as that you're less likely to drop the ball on it. If you're constantly playing it loosey-goosey and by ear and, we'll do this over here and that over there, then it's really easy to end up, I really should have proactively replaced this server like 3 years ago, but I didn't because I just kind of didn't get to it, and we don't have like a set policy that we follow. And you're more likely to get yourself in trouble that way. Whereas if you say, okay, I've got like a tickler, this machine is 5 years old, it's time to talk to the client about, okay, you're at the end of your planned 5-year life cycle, what do we want to do? And maybe they have some questions for you, or maybe they just want to say, you give me advice, and maybe say, I think we're good pushing to 7 here. This machine looks good. Or maybe say, hey, you need more than you did 5 years ago. And, maybe it's a better idea to go ahead and do a forklift upgrade on this thing. But either way, like at 5 years, you do this. At 7 years, you do that. And like for me personally right now, the 7 years, like, okay, so it's time to replace this now, period, because it's 7 years old and you're in the really crappy part of the bathtub curve. Like this is where you end up unexpectedly having a capacitor blow out on a motherboard, or, having 3 drives in a 5-drive server all fail, within 2 or 3 days. We don't want to operate like this. We want to go ahead and replace it. Yes, it might keep running without a hitch till 12 years, or everything might just completely blow up and get your cat pregnant tomorrow. This is not what we want to play with. And they say, well, we're still going to do whatever. Then they go in the, okay, they do whatever file.
Yeah. In the end, you want the migration to be planned. That's the big thing, right? Like as that 7 years is coming up, you're like, all right, we want to order the new one and in an orderly manner, get everything moved over to it, not run it until the wheels fall off. All right, now we have to get a server. Oh, there's a shortage on hard drives right now. It's going to take an extra week before we can get the new machine.
Yeah. Or like, there was a pandemic on and Wuhan closed down in China and you went 9 months without being able to get the server chassis that you wanted for a particular project, which totally happened to me. Power supplies also were a huge problem. If you wanted a power supply above 500 watts and, gold rated or above, oh my God, they were worse to find than toilet paper for, like 6 months plus.
Yeah. And I've definitely seen wait times of more than 4 weeks to be able to get 12 terabyte hard drives because everybody wanted them. And so I tell people the same thing about even just growing your ZFS pool. You want to grow it before you're already 80% full, because there's the point when you decide to make the change, and then there's the point where you can actually do it. And so you want to start it early enough that you're done before you hit the point where your pants are on fire.
Yeah, and presumably you want to flick that switch over to the new server not at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, or even worse, 5 o'clock on a Friday. You want to do that at a time when it's, you've got time to fix things if something went slightly wrong with it, right?
Well, I mean, for me, when I'm flicking that switch, it's not something that takes a long time or has any real possibility of major screw-ups, because I'm spinning up the same VMs that I just shut down on the last box. There's not really anything that's changed as far as that goes. If there was, I would have picked it up before we got to the point where we had, the like 90 seconds of downtime while I moved the VMs over. But yeah, you do want to be able to do that on a plan. I mean, the big difference there for me is like if this is a planned migration, then you're down for like 90 seconds in the final stage of my migrating the VMs over. If it's unplanned, then you may lose up to an hour worth of data, since the last automated hourly replication from production to hot spare.
Right. Plus however many hours it takes to get everything moved over and get things back up and running.
Well, that's not going to be a problem for me because, the hot spare is kept up to date with hourly replication all the time. Yep. So the hot spare will be ready to go immediately, pretty much. There's just a couple of minor configuration tweaks to, promote it to production, and all the data on it will be fine. The issue is just, again, that, you've just time traveled back up to 59, minutes and 59 seconds.
Because, I remember a similar one. We had a customer that had the storage server and it had like redundant everything, right? We have, multipath on separate HBAs and lots of hard drives and mirrors, everything. And then the one thing that can go bad.
Redundancy is not a backup. Redundancy is not a backup.
No, but this was, they weren't after the backup. Their problem was they wanted the uptime, but they blew a capacitor on the motherboard. And it's like, well, luckily we have this spare server that we can plug all the drives into and so on. But it was like, yeah, we were not happy that the one thing in our server that's not redundant, right? We have redundant power supplies, redundant HVAs, redundant disks, whatever. But, with the motherboard blows up, the motherboard has blown up. But also, turns out their hardware manufacturer is like, yeah, we don't do, 4-hour delivery of a replacement like Dell. And it's like, because how often do you actually need that?
That's also another issue with just, running your servers until the wheels fall off. When it's an 8-year-old server, you can't just get the same motherboard tomorrow.
Yep.
Which is also another reason, for virtual machines again. Like, I do not miss the bad old days before VMs when you had clients with Windows servers and that thing was not going to boot unless it was on the exact same hardware down to every nut and bolt. And you're like, where the hell do I get this, 6-year obsolete Asus motherboard from? And the answer is you don't. So, you're trying to cherry pick data off, from the hard drive and, do a clean reinstall and figure out how to get apps to work with data that hadn't been properly backed up, but you're just like siphoning off of an old dead system. No fun. It's nothing like copying database binaries at 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, while your client is yammering at you about how much money they're losing. That's so much fun.
I guess we did miss answering one part of the question. They had asked about developers filling out a form or something. We don't have anything quite so officious, but I could see how, especially, like Jim was saying, most likely now you're not going to necessarily be deploying hardware for people as much as VMs. And for planning purposes, it might be helpful to have a list of the VMs and who they're for, how much of what resources they need and what it's for when you're deciding, how to split those across your compute machines. And also when it comes time to do the upgrade of the hypervisor machines, how do you decide how much RAM to put in them or how much storage you need? Part of that is you're going to want to look at what people need, what they say they need, and what they actually were using and try to get something that, make sure you can provide what you told them you were going to, but also if they said they only needed a couple of cores and they're maxing them out all the time, maybe they need a couple more than that. Or, they said they needed 16 cores and they're never using them, then maybe you don't have to give them quite so many and you can give those to somebody else.
All right, well, we'd better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan. You can find me on Twitter @Joe Ressington.
I'm on Twitter @JRSSNet.
And I'm @Alan Jude.
And we'll be back next week.